tariffs are essentially a tax on US consumers. Businesses that import parts from the rest of the world or goods from the rest of the world will put up the cost of all sorts of goods, both for American business purchases and consumer purchases, and that will lead to both higher inflation in America and lower growth in America, which means lower growth for the world. And if there's retaliation, it means lower growth all round. So, this is bonkers economics, even if he thinks it plays well, to his core support, because they somehow believe that it will bring more manufacturing onshore. For those of you who are not watching the video, and I know many of you will be, Steph is sitting next to me in a wonderful, luminous pink jumper, but it's what's underneath the jumper that is causing me a bit of concern.
That is, what I'm going to tell you is underneath the jumper is way more boring than we might be picturing. I've got my arm in a brace because this is quite it's horrendously painful, but there is a funny side to this in that. So Robert and I are planning to do this series looking back at the credit crunch and this period when you and I worked together. And,
financial crisis.
Yes, and just all of that. So I obviously at the time had your book, How to Fix This Mess. And obviously I've no idea where it is. I probably gave it away to a charity shop. So I thought I'd better reread it again. I'll order another one. So said book came and I wasn't in, so it got put by the bins. So one cold Friday evening, I had a glass of red wine, I'll be honest. I went out of the house to get the book by the bin and literally slipped and fully hit the deck. And sorry if you're squeamish, stop, just close your ears for 30 seconds. I snapped my arm in two at the top, like full on clean break. So that was me in A&E on a Friday night. By the time I got there, because I'd got sent from various places, 11:30 at night, seeing, it's pretty grim in A&E on a Friday night anywhere. But I have to say, I was treated so well. By 2 a.m, I'd had my x-rays, I'd seen an orthopaedic surgeon who was amazing and, filled with drugs and sent on my merry, not so merry way. But in terms of, we always talk about the NHS and how much trouble it's in. Honestly, I cannot fault it. I've been back twice to the hospital since, to the fracture clinic. And it is incredibly depressing, as you can imagine any hospital would be, in terms of seeing people struggling. And I did see people in corridors in A&E when I went to various departments. But the staff were really kind and I felt like it's been quite slick.
No, and I had to take my mum for a series of sort of tests and a consultation recently to a big London hospital. And again, I was so impressed by the organisation. I mean, there was obviously a bit of waiting around, but way less than I expected. So maybe we're both quite lucky because obviously not everybody's experience is as positive as that.
Don't get me wrong. I just think everyone's been slipping on the ice up north recently. It's, when it is icy, guys, just really take care, because I never thought at 42 I would, slip on ice and break my arm like that.
And actually, I know this is going through everybody's head, but of course, when Steph told me about the break and she accompanied it with a picture, I seem to remember, of the book. Obviously, the message was this was all my fault.
Yes,
and
it was.
I've been walking around with this terrible sense of guilt.
Yeah, I wanted the headline
since.
to be Peston broke Steph's arm. That's what I wanted the headline to be, but alas, it never happened. But the other funny thing about all this, I'll just quickly tell you, is do you remember I went AWOL last year? It's now come out what I was doing. So I was filming with Bear Grylls, being chased around the Costa Rican jungle by Bear Grylls. But now all the publicity for that is coming out, and it looks like so as I'm walking around the street, people keep saying to me, "Oh, is that what Bear Grylls did to you?"
Actually, I got to tell you, I prefer that story to Robert Peston broke my arm. So let's just stick with the Bear Grylls conspiracy theory. Sorry, Bear.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, should we talk about Trump?
Yeah. So I think today it would be great to talk a little bit about the most extraordinary both inauguration speech and then flurry of
executive orders, man.
Yeah, subsequently. And we should also just talk a little bit about the latest instalment of this government's attempt to get the growth rate up.
Yes.
So what stood out for you about Trump so far?
All of the plastic surgery in the audience. No, I'm kidding. The inauguration. No, I'm kidding. No, I think for me, it's the kind of all the executive orders. It just felt like a bonfire of regulation and just a taking us into the Wild West. It was like, right, wants to bring prices down, obviously. He wants to make it great for American people. And this whole idea that you can just throw all the rule book onto the bonfire and hope that that's going to do it, it's just really scary.
I mean, it is sort of amazing, both the economic change that he's trying to drive through, and we'll talk obviously a bit about that in a minute, but also the sort of cultural changes. I mean, I was really struck to see, the world's richest men, and they are, men in this case, literally within feet of him, in prime positions at the inauguration. We had Elon Musk almost literally behind him, and then founder, massive controller of Amazon, Jeff Bezos there. We had Mark Zuckerberg there. It was astonishing to see them all paying court at a time, of course, when he does things like saying, right, no more diversity, equity and inclusion rules. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but over the last couple of years, these big international companies have all, I've been invited along to their diversity, equity and inclusion events.
Yes, I've spoken at a few of them as well, I think.
And it was, all the rage. I mean, and I think it's a good thing from, trying to get a more diverse, balanced workforce wherever you are is a good thing. Trump says, no, we're not having any of that in the US government, tearing it all up. And yet you've got these corporate leaders all sort of paying homage to him. And, I presume that these big international companies will just follow suit. And that's, that's worrying, isn't it? I mean, in itself, that one person can, essentially be at the forefront of just reverting to white men being in charge.
Yes. From a business perspective, it doesn't make sense. Diversity and inclusion and all that is not just a tick box thing. It genuinely leads to better
decision making.
Yeah, better decision making. It means you understand, you look like and sound like the people you're serving. It's economics as well as. I hate the way it is framed as it's a corporate social responsibility thing. It is also a business, a very simple business thing to look and sound like the people you are serving and working with.
And also the one thing we know is that, diverse ecosystems are healthier ecosystems.
Yeah, of course.
It's just, it's a fact of nature and it's a fact of society. The other thing, though, that we need obviously to talk about is just the extraordinary economic changes he's trying to push through. So one of the things that, the market sort of took as a positive side initially was that in the inauguration speech, yes, he talked about imposing tariffs, taxes on imports into the United States, but there was no timetable for that. There was no deadline. Markets immediately thought, oh gosh, maybe that's been kicked into the long grass based on the idea that this wasn't happening. Then, literally within hours, he says, by February the 1st, he's going to introduce 25% tariffs on Mexican imports and Canadian imports. And at that point, you get these wild swings in the Canadian dollar, the Mexican peso. The volatility we're seeing around all of this is extraordinary. He has not yet given us a timetable for the introduction of that global tariff, the one that we think will be set at something like 10 to 20% on all imports. He hasn't set a timetable for that tax or tariff on everything imported from China, which we think will be more like sort of 60%.
I thought that would be the first thing he would say, to be honest.
There is pretty much no world in which, if he does these tariffs, prices don't go up for American consumers, and there's almost no world where, with or without retaliation, if there is retaliation from the European Union, if there's retaliation from China in terms of imposing tariffs on American exports, at that point, the impact on global growth is more significant. But even without that kind of retaliation, if tariffs are essentially a tax on US consumers. Businesses that import parts from the rest of the world or goods from the rest of the world will put up the cost of all sorts of goods, both for American business purchases and consumer purchases, and that will lead to both higher inflation in America and lower growth in America, which means lower growth for the world. And if there's retaliation, it means lower growth all round. So, this is bonkers economics, even if he thinks it plays well, to his core support, because they somehow believe that it will bring more manufacturing onshore.
Do you know the other thing that really stood out to me as how is this possibly going to work? How do you think it's going to work? Is this idea, this executive order he's brought out to do with emergency price relief. So all executive departments and agencies, so we're talking about departments like Commerce and Health and Human Services and Labour, all of these departments have to bring in these emergency price reliefs. And he's saying this on the basis that some research has suggested that in Biden's administration, regulation has added something like $50,000 to the average American household. So he's like, let's get rid of all that, and then that will reduce the cost of living. That's totally nonsensical, isn't it? The idea that you can just, how does every department even do that? Like, right, we've all just got to not charge for all these different things we provide. How does it work? And also, if you look at what the cause of inflation was in Biden's time, it was, Ben Bernanke, the former Federal Reserve boss, he did lots of research on this, loads of people have. It was things like supply chain, it was commodities, the same things that hit us here in the UK. It isn't to do with how much people were paying internally for housing costs and things. I'm sure there was a contribution of that, but really inflation came from the external factors, of which no president can control, really.
Yeah, that is certainly right. He's also completely backed away from making a transition to a low carbon economy in the US. So he's eliminating hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies for the green transition. There was that amazing phrase that he used in the inauguration address, drill, baby, drill. And he's basically wants to turn the tap on when it comes to more oil and gas production in the US. And, you have to remember that, America, I think, is still currently the world's biggest oil and gas producer. It's certainly the scale of the oil and gas production in the US has driven quite a lot of America's growth over the last decade or so. And he thinks he can increase that production. There is quite a lot of actually uncertainty about the extent to which, I saw some quite interesting research today, I think from JP Morgan, which I think implied that there is more oil and gas they can actually get. Although I have to say other analysts believe that at the current prevailing market price of oil and gas, it's not, actually, the commercial decision if you're an oil and gas company to actually get it out of the ground is not as straightforward as he might think it is. So it's not quite clear really whether he can turn the taps on, and again, whether this is sort of performative, sort of a thing for show. But either way, it's the world's biggest economy, and if they are backing away from taking any steps to reduce carbon emissions, whatever optimistic politicians in the rest of the world may say about we don't need them, that's just rubbish, right? There's no way in the end that, China and India, massive CO2 emitters, are going to succumb to Western pressure to, accelerate the reduction in their CO2 emissions if America is not doing a thing.
Yeah, it's really scary, isn't it?
Obviously he's also going to push for very significant tax cuts, which pretty much every respectable analysis will be funded essentially by an increase in the American deficit. And, we are on all, sensible projections looking at over the next 10 years on the sorts of numbers we're talking about for the US deficit, currently 6% and rising on the basis of his proposals. We are looking at, America's national debt rising to sort of 130% odd, right? That is significant. We should be under no illusion about the power of the American economy. Nominal GDP, that's GDP in current prices, is rising relatively fast. It's theoretically possible that they don't fall into the debt trap of not being able to service the interest on the national debt without borrowing even more just to pay the interest. But they are getting perilously close to being seen to be unable to be able to service their debts from the growth in national income. But for some reason or other, that's not worrying markets in the way that you would expect. It's fascinating the extent to which investors just look at the US and want to pour money in. I mean, I'm torn between two possible explanations of why they're pouring money in. One is because, for whatever reason, they believe the growth story. I'm surprised by that. The other, of course, which is the great paradox of sort of mad global, sort of market psychology. Here you have Donald Trump, new US president, introducing all this incredible uncertainty into the outlook for the global economy. And as you know, when there's uncertainty, where do people put their assets?
The dollar.
They put it into the dollar. So this is the Alice in Wonderland aspect of the way markets work, that you get an American president, creates chaos, people get nervous, where do they put their assets? They give them basically to him. And that is mad, right? But it is what appears to be happening.
And on top of all of this, of one of the many things he hasn't thought through, is his absolute determination to stop people going into America, to stop immigration, and to get rid of loads of people who are absolutely key to the American economy. This mass deportation we're going to see, it's people who work in jobs like hospitality, like the food sector. If they all leave and, the need for people to fill those roles, they want more money, that's going to push up inflation. None of this has been thought through, has it?
So, I mean, you never know with Elon Musk. I mean, maybe in this sort of terrifying science fiction world we now inhabit, he has got a couple of warehouses filled with these robots ready to come out and, pick the fruit and, make the flat whites and the cappuccinos. I mean, I have to say, I'd be slightly doubtful. I don't know if I think I did tell you about the time when I was at this weird event at Lancaster House with the previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Was it when he was interviewing him?
This was when they were having this sort of interview as part of, the government's great attempt to prove that it was worried about AI safety. And as part of this conversation, Elon Musk, talked about his fear that it wouldn't be long till he was being chased by a robot up a tree, a robot who was out to kill him, and how he had to design the off button on the blooming robot. So if what we are talking about is essentially the replacement of undocumented migrants with these robots, I hope they have got the off button designed already.
Do you know what? I need a break. Can we go to a break?
Let's.
Rachel Reeves is going to do a big show piece on growth this week, isn't she? Where are you going? Where are you following her to this time?
So these things are always kept secret. So I literally...
He knows, everyone. He knows, but he's not telling us.
So look, this is the background that you have probably worked out anyway. But look, we've got a growth problem in the UK. Oh, God, that's, the worst kept secret in the world. The economy is sort of flatlining at the moment. Many businesses and economists would tell you that part of the reason why the economy is doing so poorly, frankly, is because the last budget did massively damage business confidence, partly thing that you've talked a lot about, the reduction in the subsidy for business rates. But the biggest impact on all of that came from the 25 billion hit from increasing employers' national insurance. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, would say that even when, or literally days after doing the budget, she had already worked out that she needed to very publicly show what more she is doing to get the growth rate up. And her colleagues tell me that literally 3 days after the budget, she set in train work that will be unveiled this week on Wednesday.
And just to add to that, because if businesses are going to take the hit, they want to know that there's good times to come from it, that we are going to get growth and they're going to grow because of it.
Yeah, that's right. And it wasn't that long ago when we were quite close. It didn't happen, but we were too close for comfort to a sort of fiscal crisis, a crisis where the interest rate being paid by the government was above what was affordable. With those government bond prices falling. So, of course, quite a lot of cynics will say that this growth event, because quite a lot of that spike in interest rates was because of the inflationary impact of the Trump government, something we've just been talking about, but a share of it was also just because investors have become pretty pessimistic about the growth outlook. So there will be cynics who say these growth announcements are her panicking and reacting to investors' negativism. She would say, no, this is just all planned. But you pay your money, takes your choice. There's no question in my mind that it's become much more urgent to show that she's getting the growth rate up. But the question is, given that business and investors are pretty cynical at the moment and pretty depressed about it, what she can do to turn it round. I mean, I am slightly amazed that the big sort of leak so far they think will make a massive difference, which is they will try and help Heathrow now build this third runway. Yeah. I mean, just the background for everybody about all of that. Heathrow has been wanting to build a third runway for about as long as any of us can remember. God. I mean, I don't think Queen Victoria was on the throne when they first started talking about it, but it slightly feels like it. In 2020, they basically put it on ice because the political backdrop was so negative, but they've already spent 600 million quid, right, on buying the relevant land, on getting plans drawn up, on legal advice and all the rest of it. So they've already invested a ton of money in it. The original plan back in 2020 was, believe it or not, that it would cost 14 billion quid in 2014 prices. So if you and it would take about 10 years to build, right? All of this put on ice. If you just think about it, if it's 14 billion, then it's got to be at least 20, given the inflation we've seen, the project's got to be at least 25 billion quid. And again, it'll take 10 years to build. And
the argument for it is it's about capacity, isn't it? It's about increasing the capacity there, which should help all other airports too. Like, because I know when it was like HS2 being talked about, as someone who's from the northeast, I kept going, what does it matter to me? And then I was explained to me that it's actually about taking capacity off the network to make it easier for all of us.
Let's be clear, it's a mega hub. It's quite clear that international passengers quite like going to Heathrow compared to some of the other airports. I have no idea why, because actually, it's not the world's most pleasurable experience, but that's partly because it does get too busy.
Yeah. And so it's only going to get busier, even if it's got a third runway. It's going to get, and also if we think about who owns Heathrow, it's the Qataris, it's the Chinese. There's like a lot of foreign investment firms.
All the owners. Let's be absolutely clear about this. All the owners are foreign.
So it's good news for them.
Actually, let's be clear, because the sums of money are so big, one of the things that's interesting to me is whether or not ultimately they do give, permission for this thing to go ahead, because they're going to have to find a colossal sum of money in order for them to give permission. And this is what we need to hear from the Chancellor. They need to know that the government is going to rush through planning consents and remove all sorts of environmental obstacles, because they won't do it unless they feel that there is a genuinely smooth, to use the right metaphor, I suppose, flight path to the thing actually for shovels to go in the ground and development to start. And so it does require quite a lot of boldness from the government in terms of, in a sense, forcing it through. And the politics of it are, to put it mildly, difficult for this government, because all climate scientists, and including, they will find quite quickly, their own independent climate advisor will say, as and when they give permission for it, that it will mean that the government's targets to remove emissions will be even further.
Yeah.
Because we're already off target in terms of, what needs to happen by 2035. We'll be even further off target if they do this. Within the cabinet, there's a real split between those who essentially think this is a good thing to do. Rachel Reeves, it's been saying, it's been really, again, the politics of this have been really nuts, really. So you've had Rachel Reeves in Davos, World Economic Forum, saying, got to just get on and do this good growth stuff in her language, right? You've got somebody like Ed Miliband, the climate change secretary, obviously completely stum, not said anything about it, but people close to him say he doesn't think this is the right thing to do at all. Actually, when it was voted on, I think it was 2018, the last parliamentary vote on this, Reeves voted for the runway, so she's been consistent. Keir Starmer voted against the runway, right? Because back then he was talking about the importance of making sure we hit our climate target. So, it'd be very interesting to see if he has changed position on this. Patently has changed position on this, because I happen to know this is, even though it's fraught for the cabinet, this is what they are planning to announce. But how is he going to justify that? How is he going to justify changing his position, given that it will take us off course in terms of reducing CO2 emissions?
It's also how this looks, because no matter how much you tell people of the UK, this is good for the whole of the UK, it really doesn't look like that, does it? So if you're at home anywhere outside of the southeast, you would think, how is this going to benefit me? And okay, there's things like there will be construction, there will be supply chain impact, and that could be from anywhere in the country. But really, this feels wrong when you...
It's a boost to the southeast, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm someone who looks at these things holistically and understands that it will impact lots of businesses in different ways. But really, how it looks to folk is happy days, the southeast are just getting more again.
So look, you've made an incredibly good point. It's really important in anything she announces that it isn't just seen to benefit the southeast, even if in this particular instance, essentially all the money will be coming from international investors and not from taxpayers' pockets. One of the things that they have been looking at, I don't know whether or not she will say much more about it on this programme. So again, on this podcast, I have actually on a number of occasions talked about the extraordinary growth benefits that could come from developing what's known as the Oxford-Cambridge corridor,
yes.
Sort of powerhouses in the high-tech sector in both of those places, improving transport links, allowing much more housing to be built along, within that passage of, improving transport links between the two, allowing more houses to be built, more offices and commercial premises to be built between Oxford and Cambridge, essentially providing an overarching development plan. Again, the growth benefits, the prosperity benefits, absolutely significant. Again, the problem, though, is all the rewards will be going to a part of the country that is already very well off. And so the big issue for me is what will they be doing in the northeast, in the northwest, in the Midlands, it is slightly staggering to me that you can have a Labour government that, I may essentially see a series of announcements and think, wow, they kept all that under wraps. Plainly, there's a ton more that they should be doing to improve transport links, particularly east-west transport links within your neck of the woods.
Yes, there would be so much better productivity if people could get around the country more easily. I see it every single day.
But particularly, within the North and Midlands.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
So anyway. that's all important. And I think just finally, I just wanted to make one little point, which is,
do you find it physically possible to make a little point? I don't think that is within your capabilities.
You'd be surprised how many people close to me make that complaint. All right, I'll try very hard. It is simply that I'm getting feedback from the Chancellor's trip to the World Economic Forum, from bankers, from investors, and there's a sort of half good message and a half bad message, right? There's a lot more work that the government needs to do to persuade investors in the private sector that they've got a genuine growth plan. I had one report of a dinner at which a very senior Downing Street official was told something that I know you are concerned about by, a lot of very big businesses, that actually on top of employers' national insurance, their employment rights package was a huge short-term cost for businesses, and it was causing them a lot of concern. And this particular Downing Street person just said, I hear you, but the politics of this are such that none of that is going to change. And, there's going to be no delays, and we're just going full steam ahead. Now, we've had conversations many times about why it's important to tilt power more towards employees from employers. But that said, it's also really important that we get, the juices of investors and businesses, running in a much more positive way about the UK.
So that's the bad bit.
So that's the sort of glass half empty kind of thing.
Yeah.
In terms of the messaging. So the only good thing, and this is, sounds sort of, I suppose, counterintuitive to many people, but even if investors look at the UK and think it's not that great, right? When they look at France and when they look at Germany, they think, oh my God, it's much worse there. And they do, right? Because the political instability there is really extreme. In the case of Germany, actually the economy is in a worse state than the British economy. And one of the things that is important for people to understand is that when people choose where to put their money, it's not really a beauty contest, it's an ugly contest. And basically, you're looking for the least ugly place to put your money. Because you got to put your money, if you control a ton of money, you got to put it somewhere. And actually, after a period of underperformance about the UK, even if you're a bit disappointed with what the government's doing, you sort of think, well, maybe there will be a bit of recovery in the UK.
And we've got stability.
And so I think, and we've got political stability, at least for 3 or 4 years. And then, so I think a bit more money will come into the UK. The problem is the growth. I mean, despite some of the sort of some would say bonkers things that Trump wants to do, there is an enormous amount of investor optimism about the US. Much of Asia still looks good compared to the UK, and so the thing that the UK suffers from is what you might call the European problem. And within Europe, the UK doesn't look too bad. But my goodness, we've got to do something within wider Europe to basically persuade the world that we can improve prosperity. It's so important. And there is just a bit of a sense around the place that, Europe still hasn't got the message that it's an absolute emergency to get growth and living standards up. And one of the reasons it's an emergency is because if you just look at the rise of extremist politics throughout Europe, you can't take for granted that our democracies and our way of life are secure.
But what I am taking from all of this and how I think we should end today's podcast is we are not the ugliest.
We're definitely not the ugliest.